So welcome back to the second part. The first part was called International Consumer Policy Framework. We looked at, the general global economy. Who are the consumers? We looked at the multilateral international organizations that play an important role. Now, after what we've looked at in the first part of the class today, and then what we just looked at right now, and this is very personal here. What I put down here. My feeling is that the policy area is not always taken seriously enough at a first step. Something that has been going through my mind. It's very interesting because there's all these kinds of indicators out there from the World Bank, from the IMF, etc. They measure the ease of doing business. They measure the ease of trading. They measure the level of governance, efficiency, the level of democracy, and you can see all these rankings on the internet about which country is doing how and everything. But there's no consumer policy or consumer protection indicator. Now, why is that? Why is that? And it's doable. It's absolutely doable. There's the partners out there who have the information, Consumers International, the UN, but there is no consumer policy or consumer protection international ranking or indicator.
Yeah, because I think there's, as you said, it's totally different. Every country has their own system, so it's so difficult to put the same index for everyone, so that's why it's...
Okay, but that's not exactly a valid argument because obviously, when you look at trade, every country is trading, and everybody's trading also in slightly different, under slightly different conditions, border crossing procedures. If you look at an indicator for the ease of doing trade, it's actually quite simple. How long does it take? How many different forms have to be filled? It's very simple. You build up the indicator with the different sub-indicators and see how it's going in all these different countries, and you do a rank. And if there's a rank there, then people start to become aware, and then they go like, "Oh, why am I not on rank 20 even though And then I think that kind of an international indicator is really necessary to push a policy field. Yeah, that's something. After looking in these different countries for 8-9 years, it's like, okay, all these indicators, but there's no consumer policy indicator. Why is that? Very interesting. Generally, yes, if it were the businesses who were responsible to develop that kind of an indicator, but they're not. There's Consumers International. Why don't they push that kind of an indicator? Or even the UN, which is supposed to be entirely independent from, let's say, business versus whatever kind of other perspective interests. So yeah, I think there's a gap there and it has to be filled. Yeah. And then, of course, the final very logical conclusion, more funding should be made available by governments and multilateral institutions, generally.
I would like to add to the point where you talked about international indices, for example, the UN or the IMF. I remember for our case, it was Morocco's ranking low in the Human Development Index.
Okay.
So that they launched a long-term project called the Human Development Initiative,
where
they wanted to increase that index. However, one of the years later, they said that these institutions do not measure well these indices.
Uh-huh.
One of their claims is that these international institutions do not measure well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a very common argument. No country that is being ranked by some external entity likes to be, lose the ranking. Any other questions? Now is also the chance for further Q&A.
I'm just wondering about the index that you said, because there is not any index related with consumer protection.
Well, what there is the consumer price index, okay? Well, that only has to do with prices, which which is only a kind of a part of the, you know, the whole like GDP and inflation and things like that, but like a kind of a complex indicator or a complex ranking. And there are so many out there covering all the different policy areas, all of them. But there is no international consumer policy ranking or international consumer policy index. Yeah.
But the EU, they tried to develop this consumer scoreboard, and they, for instance, looked at the prices. And so in the prices, I guess the direction can go both ways. So lower prices are good, but then there's also the quality issue. So how is prices related to quality and how can you correct that? So I think a lot of these problems is related to the fact that the consumer policy goals are so heterogeneous around the different parties.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, any attempts to create such an indicator would require to define standardized perspective on what consumer policy or protection is really supposed to do and is covering. If I would, I mean, obviously I'm bringing this up not just because, you know, it just came up to me. I've been thinking about this indicator for quite some time, actually. And, well, I would start off with something like, okay, how many consumer organizations are there per thousands population? That would be one sub-indicator. How many complaints are like handled, and then put it in ratio to another number or something, and then just include figures and dimensions that we actually are aware of. I mean, we know objective aspects that determine what good consumer policy or protection it looks like or not. So yeah, I'm just wondering why that hasn't been. I wonder why academia has not been looking at that up to now, and I even more wonder why Consumers International, either alone or even the UN, has not looked into that by now. All right. Well, looking at the time, it's 1:30. Perfect hit. If there are no further questions, then yeah, thanks for having me here. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for coming. Great. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.